Agatha Christie spent 40 years trying to stop people putting Miss Marple on screen, and the actress she finally approved of had been quietly told she would get the role back in 1946, nearly 4 decades before the BBC camera ever rolled. The story behind Britain's most underestimated detective is darker, stranger, and more improbable than anything that ever happened in St Mary Mead. Fact 1. Christie hated the films.
I cannot see why they're having such difficulty. The whole thing is very clear, Mr. Stringer.
I quite agree, Miss Marple.
Agatha Christie had a well-documented and deeply held contempt for what the film industry did to her work. The Margaret Rutherford Miss Marple films of the 1960s were the sharpest point of that contempt. Rutherford played the character as a boisterous, eccentric, jut-chinned comedy figure, warm and funny, but almost completely unlike the precise, bird-like, quietly devastating woman Christie had spent decades writing. Christie's response to the films was published via her secretary. "Mrs. Christie has asked me to tell you that, while she thinks Miss Rutherford is a fine actress, she bears no resemblance to her own idea of Miss Marple. She said this while the films were making money and the character was reaching audiences she could never have reached through books alone. It made no difference to her view." What Christie never accepted was the principle that her character could be reshaped to suit an actress's persona, a studio's commercial requirements, or an audience's expectations. Miss Marple, as she had written her, was non-negotiable. The problem was that Christie died in January 1976, leaving her estate to determine what would happen next. Fact 2. Christie predicted her own casting.
If you must know, I have some unfinished business with my little bowling instructress.
Then I shall have to come with you.
I can't prevent you, but at least don't appear to be with me.
In 1946, Agatha Christie attended a West End stage production of her own play, Appointment with Death. Among the cast was a character actress named Joan Hickson, playing a relatively minor role. Christie was sufficiently impressed that she wrote Hickson a personal note afterwards. The note read, "I hope one day you will play my dear Miss Marple." Joan Hickson kept the note. 38 years passed. In 1984, BBC producer Guy Slater was casting a new television adaptation of the Miss Marple novels. He selected Joan Hickson for the title role. She was 78 years old. The letter Christie had written in 46 was not the reason for the casting. Slater chose Hickson on the basis of her screen presence and career. But the letter existed, and Hickson had it. And when the series went into production, she was the person Agatha Christie herself had named 38 years earlier as the right person for the role. Hickson played Miss Marple in all 12 adaptations of Christie's novels, from 1984 to 1992. She retired from the role at the age of 86. The BBC received 2 BAFTA nominations for her performance. The Queen awarded her the Order of the British Empire in 1987. The series was seen in more than 30 countries. A casual remark in a note after a stage performance in 1946 turned out to be the most accurate piece of casting advice in British television history. Fact 3. Miss Marple was born from a rejected character.
Well, I don't know, except you have to play it off your own persona, I suppose. There's so many ways to play Marple, and so many people have played it so many different ways.
Miss Marple did not arrive fully formed. She was the product of a literary grievance Christie nursed for years before she resolved it in fiction. In 1926, Christie published The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, the novel that made her reputation. It contained a minor character named Caroline Shepherd, an unmarried village woman of sharp intelligence who noticed everything, heard everything, and worked out the truth of situations long before anyone else. Christie described her as an acidulated spinster, full of curiosity, knowing everything, hearing everything, the complete detective service in the home. Christie loved her. When Michael Morton adapted Roger Ackroyd for the West End stage, he removed Caroline entirely. He replaced her with a young woman, a romantic interest for the male lead. Christie's sharp, observant spinster was considered uncommercial. "I resented the removal of Caroline a good deal," Christie said later. She also described the moment, sitting in the St Mary Mead of her imagination, when she realized what she wanted to do: give old maids a voice. Miss Jane Marple made her first appearance in a short story in December 1927, just over a year after the stage production that had discarded Caroline Shepherd. Miss Marple was the answer to a slight. The character, who became one of the most famous detectives in literary history, was invented partly out of irritation with a playwright who thought a middle-aged spinster wasn't interesting enough. Fact 4. The village that never existed. Street Mary Mead, the village in which Miss Marple lives and from which she draws her understanding of human nature, is not a real place. Agatha Christie invented it. The name Marple itself was almost certainly taken from Marple railway station in Stockport, through which Christie regularly passed. For the BBC television series, the production needed a real village that could stand in for a fictional one. They chose Nether Wallop in Hampshire, a small, quiet village with period architecture, a Norman church, and the kind of English rural atmosphere that Christie's novels evoke. Dane Cottage in 5 Bells Lane became Miss Marple's own home, appearing in episode after episode across the full run of the series. Nether Wallop appears in the majority of the 12 adaptations: The Body in the Library, Murder at the Vicarage, A Pocket Full of Rye, 450 from Paddington, Nemesis, A Caribbean Mystery, and The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side all use the village for exterior scenes. The Church of St Andrews stood in for the St Mary Mead Parish Church. The production added props that did not exist in reality, most visibly a rotunda structure in the village square that was built for filming and removed when the crew left. Fans who visit Nether Wallop today find a village that looks almost exactly right, minus a few details that were always fictional. Fact 5. The Barbados episode nearly ended the series. The 10th episode of the BBC series, A Caribbean Mystery, was filmed in 1989 in Barbados at the Coral Reef Hotel, where Agatha Christie herself had stayed and which had been the direct inspiration for the novel's setting. The owners of the hotel in Christie's day were still in place decades later and were able to share Christie memorabilia with the cast and crew. Joan Hickson filmed her scenes in the Caribbean heat at the age of 83. After filming completed, Hickson announced she would not return for any further episodes. She had played Miss Marple for 5 years across 10 productions and considered the job finished. The BBC had 2 more novels to adapt. They Do It with Mirrors and Sleeping Murder, and no one to play the lead. Hickson was persuaded to return. The final 2 adaptations were filmed in 1991 and 1992. She was 85 and then 86 years old during those productions, making her the oldest actress ever to have the lead in a major British television drama series. If you're enjoying this, it would mean a lot if you subscribed. It helps us keep making videos like this one. Just hit that button and you'll never miss a new one. Fact 6. The rights were unlocked by Christie's death. Agatha Christie was, for most of her life, the primary obstacle to Miss Marple appearing on British television. Her distrust of adaptations ran deep enough that she maintained a personal veto over major productions. The character that had made her famous was also the character she was most protective of, and protecting her meant keeping her off screens she could not control. Christie died in January 1976. The rights to her work passed to her estate, managed by her grandson Matthew Pritchard. The estate's view of television was not identical to Christie's own. Where Christie had resisted, Pritchard was open to the right project, approached the right way. The initial breakthrough was not Miss Marple. London Weekend Television approached the estate in the early 1980s with a plan to adapt 2 non-Marple Christie novels, Why Didn't They Ask Evans and The 7 Dials Mystery. The adaptations were well received by audiences. The estate, seeing that careful production was possible, gave the BBC permission to proceed with Miss Marple. The BBC series that followed is now considered the definitive television version of the character. It was only possible because Christie was no longer alive to prevent it. The show, her estate approved of and that Christie's own grandson endorsed, became the version that subsequent adaptations have been measured against ever since. Fact 7. Hickson appeared in a rival production first. Joan Hickson's connection to Miss Marple was stranger and longer than most people realise. In 1961, she appeared in a minor role in Murder, She Said, the first of the Margaret Rutherford Miss Marple films. In that film, Rutherford played Marple, and a comment was made in dialogue referring to Hickson's character as belonging to the younger generation. The future Miss Marple was in the same film as the current Miss Marple, playing a younger woman. This was not the only Christie production Hickson appeared in before her defining role. In 1980, she played Mrs. Rivington in Why Didn't They Ask Evans, the LWT production that proved to the Christie estate that careful television adaptations were possible, and which opened the door for the BBC to receive permission for the Miss Marple series. So Hickson's path to the role she was born to play ran through two other Christie productions, one playing a younger woman in a rival version with the wrong Miss Marple, and one in a production whose success was the reason the right production ever got made. The layering is almost novelistic in its structure. Christie, the author who once wrote to Hickson that she hoped she would one day play Miss Marple, would have appreciated how many steps it took to get there. Fact 8. ITV made a rival version with different rules.
Well, I think all right, I don't know, I feel a bit brain dead really. It's all happened so quickly.
In 2004, 12 years after the BBC series ended, ITV launched a new Miss Marple series, Agatha Christie's Marple, with Geraldine McEwen in the title role. It ran for 6 series across 9 years, ending in 2013 with Julia Mackenzie having replaced McEwen from the 4th series onwards. The ITV version operated under a fundamentally different creative philosophy from the BBC series. Where the BBC had adapted all 12 novels faithfully, staying close to Christie's text, the ITV production took the view that Christie's novels were source material rather than sacred documents. It adapted Christie novels that had no Miss Marple in them at all, inserting the character into stories she had never appeared in. The estate's control of this process was not absolute. The ITV series made changes to plots and characters that Christie purists found difficult, including altering the identities of killers. The ITV version of A Secret of Chimneys, for instance, changed who had committed the murder from Christie's original novel. The series attracted substantial audiences and impressive guest casts. Timothy Dalton, Joan Collins, Richard E. Grant, and many others appeared across its run. But its relationship to Christie's actual work was loose in ways that the BBC series had never been. When the BBC subsequently reacquired the adaptation rights after the ITV run ended, it marked a return of the property to the broadcaster most associated with respecting the source material. Fact 9. Murder, She Wrote, was built on her foundations. Miss Marple's influence on popular culture extends well beyond Britain. The American television series Murder, She Wrote, which ran for 12 seasons from 1984 to 1996 on CBS, making it one of the longest-running detective series in American television history, was built on a template directly derived from Miss Marple. Jessica Fletcher, the mystery-writing widow played by Angela Lansbury, is an acknowledged composite, part Miss Marple, part Agatha Christie herself, part an original creation built to fit American network television. The premise: an elderly amateur female detective whose age and apparent frailty cause people to underestimate her while her mind solves cases the police cannot, is the Miss Marple premise transposed to Cabot Cove, Maine. Angela Lansbury had played Miss Marple herself in the 1980 film version of The Mirror Cracked. She was 55 at the time and wore substantial age makeup to play a character considerably older. The performance did not satisfy Christie purists, but it gave Lansbury a direct familiarity with the character whose DNA she then used to build Jessica Fletcher. Murder, She Wrote ran for 12 seasons, and at its peak, drew 30 million American viewers per week. The show it was built from 12 novels, about an elderly English spinster from a village called Saint. Mary Mead had never been intended to generate anything of the kind. Miss Marple's shadow falls over American television in ways that have never fully been acknowledged. Fact 10. The Christmas tradition she created. Agatha Christie published her first Miss Marple novel in 1930. Between that year and her death in 1976, she wrote 11 more, 12 novels in all, plus 20 short stories. The BBC adapted all 12 novels across 8 years, from 1984 to 1992. Joan Hickson had a particular attachment to the idea of Miss Marple as Christmas viewing. She was fond of episodes airing at Christmas, or in the Christmas holiday period, and several of the adaptations were scheduled accordingly. The first episode of the series, The Body in the Library, aired on Boxing Day 1984, establishing from the outset a connection between Miss Marple and the Christmas television schedule that continued across the run. The association was not accidental. Christie's novels had long been considered perfect Christmas, reading the cozy village setting, the fireside atmosphere, the puzzle to be solved. The BBC series translated that association into television scheduling. Christmas became, for a generation of British viewers, partly defined by a new episode of Miss Marple. When the series ended in December 1992, with the mirror cracked from side to side, airing on the 27th, it closed a tradition it had helped create. The final episode of a series that had run for 8 Christmases aired at Christmas, with an 86-year-old actress playing a character she had been promised the role of 46 years earlier by the woman who invented her.